So, first little vlog of the day. Today is going to be the day I explore Tripoli. Got up early, 6 o'clock, and yeah, kind of ticking off all the various little sites. There's nothing super spectacular here. One thing though that I've decided not to do is, and not just here in Tripoli, just in general, is to commit to going into museums and public spaces, unless it's an art gallery, like of good standing. I refuse to go into museums, and it's mainly because I don't trust the artifacts. I know, and I'm not being arrogant, I know enough now, really, about true history to know that most of what you see in exhibitions, historical exhibitions at least, are usually fraudulent. It goes for art as well, but art's a little bit different in that, you know, if something is original, it doesn't matter to me if something is a replica or not. You know, it's the quality of I guess the workmanship, or if it's a print, it's just, you know, what the art itself stands for and means. It doesn't have to be the authentic brushstrokes of the originator, let's say. Whereas history is obviously a little bit different. You know, if you're looking at a piece of pot and they say, oh, this is 2,500 years old, when in fact it was just made yesterday and made to look old, it's a different story. And the history is artifacts hold their importance in their origin, in the narrative of where they've come from, of you know, the story that was ongoing at the time when the piece of pot perhaps smashed on the floor and was buried by hundreds of years of debris. It's not the pot itself, it's what it's its background. It's meaningless if it's from 1985. Its only value comes from the fact that it's from, you know, 1802 or 1502 or, you know, 1000 AD. It's really not the quality of the workmanship. It's the timeline, let's say. But anyway, that's a bit of a rant. One of the things that was recommended here, which I guess is somewhat interesting, but I'm not paying an entrance fee to see a load of nonsense, and I'm also not paying entrance fees because I don't want to sponsor what these things stand for, which is really the more important factor. But as you can see in front of you, what have you got here? This is in St. Louis in the United States, as one of hundreds of examples. Obviously we have the pyramid next to it. This is one of these projects that the Masons do everywhere in the world, and if you go through my channel you'll see tons of these. I call them the Freemasonic theme parks. One could even go as far to say that a lot of the so-called archaeology that we see today, a lot of the ancient, I should say, archaeological sites, and we say that loosely in inverted commas, are in fact more modern than we think, and they're a result of these infinite resets that perpetuate people at the plinth of society, at the top, the very echelon of the higher social sphere. This is what propels them into kind of an infinite loop of let's say, almost immortality, because they build these empires, these civilizations, and then they destroy them and they leave their mark. And that could be, well, what the sites in Cairo and Giza and Luxor and down into northern Sudan, where there's also a nice array of pyramid structures, not to mention all the other structures around the world, you know, the Mayans being a prominent example. And there's actually pyramid structures everywhere, Europe as well. Of course, they plant Paleolithic tags and Neolithic tags all over these sorts of things, and they try and segregate and separate them from one another, where in actual fact it's more likely that they're a part of a singular centralized authority at one point in history. But anyway, so you see these everywhere. You know, this here, it's the dome, whereas the dome seen, I guess, prominently, well, it's the O2. It was created as the Millennium Dome originally for the year 2000, completely occultist as well, and again, it's like an exhibition space, as they often are. It's a representation of the transition from one era to the next, essentially a reset. Like I said, you have this in St. Louis, these are everywhere, and then of course you have the pyramids, which you see everywhere, from all ages. There's one in bloody Tirana that you can climb, if it's still there. But anyway, so the fee is actually quite reasonable, but actually there's a number of factors. Like I said, you shouldn't pay to sponsor things which are just inherently corrupt. I mean, when this was built, my hotel owner told me it was built around the 50s or 60s. I haven't verified this. To me, it seems more 60s, because the architect is apparently the same guy that designed the Supermasonics theme park in Brasilia, you know, the centralized capital, the new planned capital project, which I believe was late 50s, 60s as well. So this kind of fits into that. I wouldn't say it's 40s, I could be wrong. But yeah, you see these everywhere. Like I said, it's the same architecture that we've seen that was responsible for constructing Brasilia, the same kind of brutalist, transitionary architecture, let's say, from one age to the next. And yeah, it's super, symbolic. It's completely Masonic. It's super occultist, which Masonry and occultism is one and the same. And yes, if I did a little bit of research beforehand, I wandered around, I could probably make 5 hours of this, pointing out all the different, symbolic meanings for each and every structure and the artifacts and other exhibition spaces that are there. But yeah, anyway, I don't have time. I'm not really interested. I can Google this stuff. It flashes in front of me all the time. But for those that want a quick glimpse and maybe a little background piece of information that they can then kind of expand on through search engines and whatnot, this is what this is about. And it would have cost an absolute fortune as well. That's the absurdity of it. This is Lebanon. It's not particularly like... it's not Manhattan in New York, is it? It's not a place of infinite wealth. That all the people have poverty. It's a place of, I guess, infinite conflict, we could say. So long as it's adjacent to Israel, there will always be a conflict, and that's of course intentional. Certain societies, or all societies governed by extreme lunatics, require an enemy state to, I guess, solidify their sense of community spirit, to make them as homogenous as possible. They always need someone in the background that they can shout at and say is attacking them. That's the way the world has always worked: east versus west, left versus right, Christianity versus Islam. But yeah, it's really fascinating. So if you want to Google, just go Tripoli. I'm not in Beirut, so Tripoli, and then type in, I guess, exhibition space. And if you look at Tripoli on a map, Google Maps, Maps.me, whatever, it is a giant circle. I mean, I would say a huge proportion of Tripoli itself, at least 20% of the city, is this weird complex. And there's another aspect of it as well, which pertains to the sun god. You see those in Canary Wharf, and again everywhere. That's just one example of perhaps a slightly better shot. And actually I saw one of these in Kyrgyzstan. I mean, they really are everywhere. A lot of them are sort of abandoned now. I've been to one in Los Angeles. There's a famous one which has now been converted into a relatively high-grade art gallery. It's all the same. This is all Masonic money. It's all aligned to certain, I guess, mythological timelines that they sponsor. They don't sponsor the standard calendars like we do, the Gregorian and the St. Julian's, which are, I guess, fictitious anyway. They've manipulated the timelines to, I guess, protect their interests in so many different ways. And they certainly use other timelines from Mesopotamia and other civilizations, one of which begins with A that I've forgotten the name of. But they're all somewhat aligned to Judaic practices. And yeah, there we go. It's absolutely vast. Like, if you look at it, apparently the hotel owner was also telling me there's tunnels underneath this. There's also tunnels to the castle, apparently. The ancient castle, we're told. But there's tunnels underneath this that go to the port. And the reason, the official narrative, is it would have enhanced trade. They would have been able to bring merchandise from the ports directly into this sort of shopping centre, this exhibition space, and everyone would have been able to kind of sell their wares. That whole story is absolutely ludicrous. I mean, it sounds very plausible, doesn't it? But if it was so simple, then everyone would do that, and no one's done that. It's just really not the object of business, and it clearly didn't succeed. So, yeah. But I mean, we have a better view from here, actually. Again, you don't really need to pay to see this stuff. There's nothing inside as far as I'm aware. There is no museum or exhibition space, I was told, other than what you see outside in the form of these kind of architectural monuments to the impending doom, the Masonic pedo club. It's in essence a giant park. But yeah, I mean, you just can't get more occultist than this, can you? And like I said, these are everywhere. And as I was walking along, I was thinking about the Eiffel Tower as well, because obviously Lebanon is sort of synonymous with French culture. Everyone here speaks French. And I was thinking about when I was in Pakistan, there's an Eiffel Tower. I've seen the Eiffel Tower half a dozen times in various different countries, from different ages, we're told. Some from almost close to when the original, and I say that loosely, the original Eiffel Tower was constructed, obviously in Paris. And then some more modern replicas, we are told, sort of a homage to the original, which is sort of strange, isn't it? I saw another one in China, in Xinjiang as well. An old one, mind you, not one that was being constructed recently. But yes, very similar actually to the Nubian pyramids in northern Sudan. Just ridiculous, isn't it? I mean, again, it's one of those things where we're told that money is the kind of, look at this abandoned car park, the whole thing is absolutely obscene. You know, we're told that money is, well, we're not told, I know this, a lot of people that have half a brain perhaps know this, perhaps not all of us are engaging in the right direction, but, you know, we're told money is the kind of principle of, it's the originator of greed, power, hunger for power. Money is power, so hunger for money is really on everyone's minds. And as we see with kind of middle ground corruption, that's certainly a truth. It's not a truth for those that print the capital themselves. You know, capital is infinite, and as currency becomes digitized, it's even more infinite. That's somewhat of an oxymoron, but I guess you understand what I'm saying. So if, you know, everything was about money, if the people in a position of authority cared about capital, if everything was truly aligned to, you know, accounting, making sure the books kind of stack up, there wouldn't be enough capital for this in the first place. And also, this is the centre of town, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this is 20% of Tripoli. It's not, you know, the kind of parameter that you see before you on this camera. It is super extensive. It doesn't go back to the back gate that you may have seen when we glimpsed past the pyramid when I went up to the entrance here. It is absolutely huge. It's 20% of the city with just these fucking occultists, you know, this iconography and the symbolism. You know, if it was about money, there wouldn't be money for this, and also the land value would be obviously worth a lot more for real estate development, for a genuine shopping mall, for all kinds of things, for just, you know, for suburban housing, for people that have a couple of million to splash, you know. And look, it's all abandoned, and it has been apparently for, you know, 4 or 5 decades. So it goes to show that really nothing is about money, which is what I've always said. You know, that's the kind of mainstream system of teaching, you know, the basic economic practice, that the world is governed by coinage, by capital. That's what kind of makes the world go round. It's absolutely not true. Capital's not real, which is why, you know, you've got infinite amounts of debt post-COVID, post-Wall Street crash, post every financial catastrophe that's happened. There's always capital to bail out the existing debt. And debt in itself is obviously completely ludicrous. As I've said many times, if you're the wealthiest country in the world, you can't simultaneously be the poorest. Yeah, the wealthiest countries have so much debt they couldn't pay them back, even if they weren't accruing extra interest in thousands and thousands of years. You know, the UK still owes money to Jewish families, of course, because they are the principle of capital. From the 1850s, from the Napoleonic War, the UK hasn't paid off in entirety their debt from the war, the Battle of Waterloo, that conquest against Napoleon, which was over 200 years ago. I believe it was 1815, the Battle of Waterloo. That capital's not paid off fully. Do you see what I'm saying? You know, it's not real. Nothing's real. It's all fake. Everything is completely and utterly ludicrous. And, you know, what's very sad is, this was going to be a very short video, but I'm just going to keep ranting now. I don't use social media generally, but recently I logged into Instagram, and I have tens of thousands of images that I've collected, and in no particular order, no particular vetting process. I've decided, well, I'm just going to post them up every day, one image a day. Again, there's no logic to it. I will literally just sweep across one of my folders and just download, let's say, 100 images, put them on my phone, and then every day for 3 months I'm going to just post one, not even looking at them. And the reason is because, you know, one image has the power to change someone's perspective. And again, I don't have a public profile. I only have 100 odd so-called friends on Instagram. Part of it is, you know, the fact that I know these people or have met them at some point, even though I probably don't remember 95% of them. The idea is that if I had spoken to them and if I had exchanged contact, it's more than often the case that I felt that they were a little bit more intelligent than the average being. And therefore, perhaps me sharing these images at some point when they log in, they look through their feed of all kinds of bullshit, friends and families, babies, people on holiday, they see something that might kind of stick out to them and make them question. And that's what's really important. You know, it's not about creating followers, just like my YouTube channel. I use it as a Dropbox. It's just, if one person sees something that really changes their outlook on life, I think that's, it's profitable for me. I think really that's what's important, being able to change the world for the better, even if the world is just a singular being. What was my point? Yeah, so, because I'm logging in once a day, usually in the morning, just to post one image, which takes a few seconds, sadly I find myself, on occasion, scrolling through the feed, and obviously the algorithm is tailored to things that I've looked at in the past, so it's all what they want me to see, and it's all hateful and inciting, and that's really what it is now. This is what these platforms are for, and a lot of people will fail to identify the fact that what they're seeing isn't representative for everyone, and it actually gives people a lot of false hope. So people on the right side of the political league, let's say, people that understand what's happening, intentional division, this animosity and hatred towards Muslims, which isn't always unjustified, because many of these Islamic migrants have been imported in intentionally. They've been vetted. I mean, their system is absolutely super advanced. When you see people being thrown into dinghies, those dinghies, every single time they reach the UK from France, they're put back on a truck and driven back to the French shore and reused. The whole thing is a systematic operation, of course. It's been 10 years and Europe is now flooded with migrants, and who do you think is paying for that? And the whole idea, it's the same premise, it's the same origin behind these resets, is to create civil war. Civil war gives those in a position of authority more and more power. It disseminates any unity that's left on this earth, and each and every time the pizza is resliced, the flavours become more compact, they become smaller, their sizes diminishes naturally. If you keep slicing and slicing and slicing, you're just left with an array of tiny little groups without any authority and one just fucking hegemonic superpower, which is of course the kind of Zionist Judaic overarching power, if you want to kind of put it that way. I personally don't like using the word Zionism because it dilutes the responsibility of who it is that's actually causing these problems, and it's people that self-proclaim themselves as of the Jewish faith, which is aligned to Israel for the most part, for the overwhelming most part. It's something like the Israeli government and the persecution of, and I'm really not interested in Palestine at all, to be honest, because again I think this dilutes also the problem. Palestine is irrelevant from the conversation. Palestine is just a microcosm. It's just one aspect, not even a large aspect, of the problems the world faces as a result of this echelon of society, these people that are subscribed to Judaism. They control absolutely everything. They control the media, they control the banks, they control the pornographic industry, child abuse, human trafficking of all kinds, for organs, for rape, for all kinds of sadistic, occultist practices. It's all the same people that are governing this. They control everything. They control everything in Hollywood. There's even examples where the richest people in Africa are actually Jews, and they converted themselves to Christianity because there are certain points where it's too difficult to hide their kind of criminal engagement. Stalin was Jewish, and you'll find no evidence of him being officially Jewish, aside from the fact that he spoke fluent Yiddish, that's a fact, and he had 3 wives and girlfriends, all of whom were Jewish. Obviously Lenin and Trotsky, and the leader of the Holodomor genocide, which you might not have even heard of, in which actually many millions of Ukrainians were murdered, rather than the disputed figures of the Second World War. And I say that with a chuckle because it is so ludicrous. It's the same numerological patterns that we see everywhere. It's the same numbers, the 3s and the 6s. A lot of people are becoming more aware of this, and I genuinely think that is the case, at least with respect to numerology, because, just like any empire, when it expands, you can compartmentalize your corporation, which is what these people are. These are just cultist corporations, as much as possible. But as the world expands, you need more members. With more members, there's more risk. Everything becomes a little bit more unstable. That's just a reality. And that's again why every successful society is one that is kind of down to the bare bones, the minimal. If you have too many people, and the homogeneous nature of the group kind of diminishes, declines. But anyway, yeah, so that was my point. When you get this kind of false sense of hope, and then you realise how stupid people are. It's the classic divide and conquer, where they've imported all these migrants into all these countries. People have justified animosity against them because more than often, organically, they're just cause problems. They're from a different culture, which is just not in similitude to the culture that they have now immersed themselves in. And then when it isn't as straightforward as that, when perhaps there are, cultures where there is a level of kind of homogenous nature being applied amongst various religions, for example, Yugoslavia, Bosnia and Herzegovina before the conflict, and the removal of Tito and the destabilization of that empire, we could call it, which again was all pre-planned. They artificially inseminate it. So, for example, in Sarajevo now you have, actually it's not just Sarajevo, it's everywhere. In the, let's say, more liberal Islamic world, you have unlimited capital, because as I said, capital is unlimited, deriving from, at least on paper, Saudi Arabia and Turkey, where they are religiously colonizing the world. You'll see every mosque that you see in Central Asia is paid for by the Turkish government or the Saudi government or one of these Gulf state nations. You've obviously got the more liberal forms of Islam being completely disseminated, which is generally Shia Islam. But that's also occultist as well, and that aligns to the Aga Khan, and I could do a whole video on the Aga Khan. And there is no separatist state, of course. I've always said that the world is completely globalized in terms of the authority. Iran is run by the same people that run Russia. Putin's mother's Jewish, by the way. All these people are part of the same cabal, but on a kind of micro level, on the kind of community level, in places that are a little bit more rural, in countries where they haven't conformed entirely to the technological advancement of the West, where everyone has a fucking smartphone and they're completely indoctrinated, it's a little bit more difficult to sway these people towards your narrative, i.e. the elitist narrative, in a set period of time. Thus, they initiate wars. That's the way of fast-tracking, essentially, the insolvency of these countries, or these nations, these communities, I should say, rather than just going through the slower process, which is what's happened in the West. It's taken a very long time for people to become completely inept intellectually, and people have become betaized through the diets, through the feminization of society, the eradication of traditional values, the removal of Christianity as the pillar of Western culture, while simultaneously promoting Islam and pretty much any other religion in the world aside from Christianity. You build and you knock down, and that's how you create infinite division, and that's what creates infinite power for you as the dividing tool. And these are people, again, that subscribe to Judaism for the most part, at least on paper. It could even go deeper than that, and it could be much, much more occultist, but it's kind of irrespective of whether that's true or not. And there is perhaps an underlying deep, dark force that is kind of, I guess, imitating Judaism. Most people within Israel, which is the pillar of Judaism, do support all kinds of extremist activities. And you're like, oh, have you been to Israel? I have actually been to Israel multiple times before the Palestinian conflict. And as you know, or perhaps you don't know if you're listening, I've traveled to over 120 countries. We're in Lebanon right now. It's been my entire life. I've been traveling constantly, and I usually go to a place and I try not to have a kind of preconceived notion of what that place is going to be like. I really don't care so much about the individual conflicts that Israel and the kind of Jewish state is a part of. It's the only country I've ever been to where I've seen the most sickening behaviour of my life at the airports. I personally had all my clothes taken off, my laptop broken, my phone broken, just for visiting a museum in Ramallah, by the way, on my exit from Israel. They then put my stuff in a trash bag, threw it across the floor in Eilat Airport, and in front of everyone, most of whom were kids and, I guess, working class families looking for a cheap beach holiday in Eilat from Poland. And verbatim, this man said, I don't give a fuck about you or any of these people. And this is years ago. This is like 10 years ago. I've even had instances where just you'd be talking to someone that's Jewish in Israel, and they're like, oh, where have you been traveling to? And I'm like, oh, I was in Jordan before, which is like not even a real Islamic country. Jordan is like a complete fake state with a monarchy that is of British origin, and they're most likely Jewish. If you trace the heritage and the lineage and you did a bit of research, I'm sure you'll find that to be the case. They're literally just a load of white people proclaiming themselves as the kind of kings of Jordan, or whatever title they choose to use, whether it's sultan or sheikh, I don't know. But anyway, there would just be silence in the room because you visited Jordan. Like, you know, these people are absolutely insane. Everywhere you travel where Israelis have, I guess, a free pass, so weaker countries, kind of the sickening nations of the world like India or Nepal. Nepal has Israelis everywhere. They're just absolutely unhinged. Like, it's really, truly sick, psychopathic people. You know, if you remove their little Star of David, which is their shield, their ultimate defense mechanism, you know, they would be deemed as like the most, and I say this loosely because I don't believe it, you know, really those that are deemed right-wing aren't actually right-wing. You know, the typical notion of bald-headed men in the 80s with tattoos that go to the gym and wear Doc Martens beating up blacks and people of, I guess, what we would call a minority disposition is completely ludicrous. It's all fantastical. But Israelis, for, you know, a sizable proportion of them, would align to the behaviours that are portrayed in those scripts. They would be more aligned to those characters than people who are supposedly, you know, those characters. The average working class Brit, for example, who is constantly discriminated against, or, you know, the Southern American, oh, they're all racist, they have a Confederate flag. And what all these people have in common, of course, they're all Caucasian, because we can see everywhere they're removing Caucasians from I guess, the plinth that they allowed our racial group and our culture to have. You know, it was all funded by merchant practices. The East India Company is Jewish. The slave trade was run almost overwhelmingly by Jewish merchants. The biggest drug dealers in history of the world that we know of are Jewish. The Sassoon family, funded by the Rothschilds, were the traders of opium, the biggest traders. That's where Hong Kong Shanghai Bank comes from. It is literally a giant funnel for drug money, and it is still a funnel for drug money to this day. The biggest fine in US history, and I've said this many times, but we sometimes have new viewers, was the HSBC Bank by the US government. Of course, this is all farcical, it's nonsense, it has no impact. It only equated to 1 month's profit for them. It was over $1 billion. They were laundering the Sinaloa cartel, the biggest Mexican cartel or biggest drug cartel in the world today. They were laundering their money. It's the same bank. It's the same families. They're all of Jewish origin. The originators, the banking practices that allow this behaviour to ensue as one of the tentacles of the operation. It's all of them. You know, the pornographic industry. You know, you can just go and find some tacky little podcast by one of these mainstream sort of Joe Rogan channels, and even they just openly talk about how they only had 36 moderators for the biggest pornographic channels in the world. So we're talking like RedTube, Xvideos, all run by the same people, by the way. All of them were Jewish. So there was no way for them to know who was raped, who was underage in those videos. So we can assume a sizable group of people were, of course, being raped. A sizable group of both men and women there were underage. And they're all Jewish. And no one goes to jail. Nothing happens. In fact, they got fined. They rebranded, changed name, and then it was sold to another group of Jews. So it's the same. So all these evil practices, sickening criminal activities, are all operated by the same people. The propaganda mechanism that we see today, the mainstream media, in its newest form, the internet, 666 in Hebrew, www. You know, I guess the internet is like cryptocurrency. It's very similar. People are like, oh, it's this kind of like magic, you know, invention by these very intellectual, high-grade individuals. It was just like this organic process of scientific advancement and genius, computing nerds. You know, like, what's his name? Vitalik, that created Ethereum, also Jewish, by the way. Or BTC, you know, it's this guy called Satoshi or whatever it is. You know, this Japanese guy is proclaimed as being, because Japanese is a brand. Everyone thinks, oh, Japanese, they're, you know, woo, they're strong, they're independent, they're, you know, polite. It's a symbol of quality. Japan, of course. It wouldn't be cryptocurrency founded by an Iraqi. No, of course, it's all nonsense. And they have their little scams, you know, in between this, like FTX, the biggest rug pools of all time. Rug pool is it's a pyramid scheme. You get people to buy into cryptocurrency like anything else. Real estate projects, usually the most common means of raking people's money. And then you pull the plug. And guess what that guy was called? these are just examples that pop into my head. I literally it's so many very sick and deep examples. But in this example, his name was Sam Bankman Freud. Sounds like bank fraud, doesn't it? What a coincidence. One of the biggest rug pulls, the biggest rug pull in history, FTX, was undertaken by a teenager, by the way. Of course he wasn't responsible for it, just another front man, just like Elon Musk or these presidents. They didn't actually do anything. I mean, how thick does someone have to be to think, these characters that are politicians sit in their office actually doing work, or these businessmen like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, they're not actually the creators of these these organizations. I mean, come on, it's fucking ludicrous. Jeff Bezos is also Jewish. Elon Musk is no doubt Jewish, I'm sure, if we properly traced his heritage. I mean, maybe he is publicly Jewish. I don't really look at these people anymore. I just assume it's the case. But anyway, yeah, that was a little rant. I'm sure you've enjoyed looking at the side of the road. This is actually the cleanest part of Lebanon I've seen thus far. And of course, because it surrounds, we get a little glimpse of just one section of this fucking abandoned monstrosity. That's probably where they're going to put the concentration camps in the coming years. But anyway, yeah, sorry, that was a rant. You should have learned something from that. Is that bloody orange? What is going on here? That looks perfect. Am I being scammed? It's literally a perfect orange. I'm going to pick it up because there are little orange trees here, but I feel like if they were edible, homeless people, and there are many, would have come and collected them. So usually, just like in the US, because this is the sick world that we're in, they take these trees and they spray them with chemicals, or it's an aesthetic type of orange or tangerine or mandarin or clementine, satsuma, that isn't actually edible. You bite into it and it's disgusting. I assume that's the case because, honestly, if this was free fruit, a homeless guy would collect them all, go down to the market and sell them for undercut the competitors. Anyway, God, I could talk forever. Sounds very OCD or ADHD. I'll leave it there, and I will have some videos on other aspects of Tripoli, including the castle, the port itself, and very interestingly, there's an abandoned train station. So there we go.